So it's me again. I will try today just to give you some insights concerning our research, and I've decided to have a showcase. I think it's easier to understand what we are doing if we have kind of a case we are tackling with, and I've decided to choose the case of waiting list cheating in German organ transplantation sector. This was quite of a big scandal since 2012, and we do have a lot of information about that case already, but the scandal isn't over now. So I think it's quite a good starting point to show what we are doing. And now you have the same question. Under what conditions hospitals with legal purposes using improper or illegal means? And of course, most of you know there are two paradigms we are dealing with. One is a rational choice paradigm, which is, I would say, kind of dominant concerning the analysis of this kind of deviance. And then we do have like personal gains. You have to have opportunities and probabilities. And of course, important are costs and sanctions that are expected. So you see, this is kind of a version of smart, or at least calculating criminals, which are carrying out this kind of corruption that leads to corporate crime. And the second paradigm is more what we would call deviant rules corruption. So deviant rules corruption is about organizational deviance, and where you have kind of a deviant environment, kind of institutional environment, which is open to deviance. You have organizational benefits, of course, before it's detected. You have organizational benefits that are important. You have what is important from a sociological perspective, of course, unwritten rules, and what social psychologists call a social cocooning. And very often you do have high-ranked insiders who are committing this kind of crime or deviance by any costs. And I think this is another part of the story where we do have high-ranked insiders, and insiders is important, playing by deviant rules. So you see we have now the same frame, and we are checking on adaptation processes as well as on circumvention of rules. So this leads to the level of regulation. So we have a Transplant Act in 1997 where you have criteria like the prospect of success of a transplantation and the urgency of a transplantation. Then you have a mandate that was given to the Medical Association where the Commission of the organ transplantation did implement guidelines to make clear who's allowed to be included into the waiting list and how it is dealt with the prospect of success and the prospect concerning the urgency. So there have been statements done, diagnosis-related statements done by the centers, and the allocation is then done by the Eurotransplant, which is just, you know, more like a computer system than allocating the distribution of organs concerning matching factors and so on. So important is the scarcity of organs. So this is, of course, a very, very terrible situation for the patients as well as for the physicians. We have a high scarcity of organs, and this leads to strong incentives for gaming. Also, there's kind of a competition between not the centers, but between the physicians and surgeons. We will deal with it later on. After 1997, I would say we had a lot of opportunities concerning to provide and to deal with false statements, to include patients on the waiting list. And this was kind of because of considerably low level of control. So it was not so easy for the Medical Association and the Monitoring Commission to get access to the patient's files. This changed in 2012, and then all the cheating was revealed by the Commission of the Medical Association, because they now could go into the patient files, and then they found considerably high amount of cheating. So what did we do? Of course, we don't have any studies during that time, so it's kind of an ex post analysis. And we did content analysis, interviews. We did 3 case studies in transplant centers with 70 interviews, 1 participant observation, and 43 more interviews, and concerning physicians and surgeons working for university hospitals who have been mostly involved. We did a collective mindset analysis. So first, I think the good message is concerning kidney transplantation and pancreas transplantation. There have been no cases revealed. This is just, you see, between 2010 and 2012, and then we have liver, heart, and lung transplantations, and 48% of all transplantations have been inspected. And as you can see, the share of manipulations or of cheating is quite high. So we have 19% concerning liver transplantation, 15% concerning heart, and 14% concerning lung transplantations. Altogether 70% of inspected transplantations where we did find cheating. So you can see that we have kind of a environment open to deviance, because you can see it's kind of spreading all around Germany. I don't say it's contagious. It's just we have so many cities and transplantation centers independent from each other, where we find this. You have Munich, Jena, Leipzig, Cologne, Münster, Berlin, and we do have, concerning heart transplantations, our own university hospital as well. So you can see somehow the institutional environment was open to deviance. Most of the time, if we look at the ways of cheating, most of the times it has been false statements. So this was kind of easygoing. Not a lot of criminal energy was involved, not a lot of covering and so on. So most of the time there have been opportunities to cheat and to provide false statements. Sometimes you just needed across on a formula, and then you had a high urgency status. So there was a low criminal energy involved. So we've checked, of course, on legal incentives, and the judge and some of the lawyers checked on illegal payments. And have there been benefit schemes where you've got your benefits according to the number of transplantations? They had those benefit schemes, but they have been rare cases. So Göttingen, where the trial took place, was one of the places where they had those benefit schemes. Where private patients involved, in 95% of the cases, this haven't been private patients. Illegal payments, so this is probably the hardest point, because in one trial at Göttingen that ended in the first instance with an acquittal of the defendant, the judges say they have no kind financial interest involved, no illegal payments have been involved, and we've talked to some other lawyers in Munich and Leipzig, or had statements from Leipzig, who said the same, that there are no illegal payments so far involved, because this was for the media, of course, the hot point that they said, okay, some people from Russia or from Jordania came in and put, 50,000 or 100,000 euros on the table to have an organ transplanted. Career advantages, of course. Mostly people that are in investigations right now are chief residents. So we have high-ranked physicians, but not the top level. So the minority have been medical directors, but of course this is also part of the trial, because chief residents mostly sign and not the medical director. So it's kind of easier to have them on trial. So for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of the hospitals, of course, what we found when we checked the numbers, it was kind of interesting. There was kind of a, concerning liver transplantation, a race to the top. So it was not like you had to avoid that the centers are going down and will be closed down because the number of transplantations are too low. You can see these are kind of the ranking positions, and you can see mostly, with one exception, during 2000 and 2009, they were climbing up the ranking, and the correlation is significant and very high, 0.44. So it's quite obvious that we have kind of a race to the top, where competition really matters between the centers. So now, of course, we are talking about subcultures, social cocooning in the centers. That's not so easy to do. But we found some indicators. And one indicator is quite clear. If you look at the 12 centers with violations of the guidelines, and just count the average number of violations of the guidelines, then you see this is kind of a negative list. But top 1 is Göttingen. So 75% of inspected transplantations have been manipulated. So that's quite something. Jena, 63%. Heidelberg, 56%. So it's not just one. And it's not just, one criminal guy violating the guidelines. There must be something more behind. And altogether, in the average of all centers, of all 12 centers, it has been more than 1/3 of transplantations, and only we've counted patients, not the number of violations. So 1/3, more than 1/3 of patients where the monitoring commission found violations of guidelines. So if we check on our interviews and on the collective mindsets, on the unwritten rules behind, we find one thing which we didn't expect as strong as it is. So the hospital itself is not the most important thing for the physicians. It's more related to the profession. And it's not like an economic competition between university hospitals or the transplantation centers. These are non-profit organizations mostly, and they are mostly into red numbers. Yeah. So it's not about economic competition; it's about profession-based competition. And there's one quotation. Of course, we know who's transplanting the most organs in Germany. Concerning the medical profession, there's of course a fierce competition in this area. There's not just one quotation. This is kind of a part of the collective mindset. So the action rule is related to the peers of the medical profession, and the more transplantation, the better, was one of these action rules. And hierarchy is also different from companies, because you have a professional knowledge involved. So if you're not a physician, what do you have to say? So physicians have superior knowledge, and if you're not a physician, it's difficult for you. So a lot of the personnel staff members told us, okay, if the medical director or the chief resident tells us, we do. He knows best. I haven't studied medicine. So the best statements, or the clearest statements we got, was from the positions above and underneath the medical directors. So this was one of the board of directors. And he told us, you must know the center was a monarchy. There was only one who took the decisions. And if he's now hiding and telling us it was a chief resident, that's ridiculous. Nothing happened in the center that was not approved by the king. Or one chief resident in a written note, so we could not tape a lot of these interviews, of course. Very often there are fall guys. The pressure to do something that's not complying with the guidelines is strong. And if it's detected, you will be sacrificed. So compliance with a supervisor is more important in the action rules than compliance with the guidelines. And then, of course, we have a whole different stories about the guidelines themselves, because it's of course very difficult to relate prospects of success to urgency, and then you have a lot of conflicts when you're doing that. And for a lot of physicians we've been talking with, they told us, okay, the guidelines lead into a dilemma. You have a patient and are not allowed to carry out the transplantation. But if you wait, you cannot help him anymore. Finally, the patient got 3 organs transplanted and died relatively fast with a prolonged history of suffering. So the action rule was in some cases, you have to fox out the guidelines to do your duty as physician. So if we're coming back to our explanation frame, you see for a lot of physicians the status of regulation was kind of unclear. So what kind of status did the guidelines have? The trial in Göttingen made it clear, because the complaint was attempted manslaughter. So this was quite shocking for a lot of physicians. So you have an environment that was, not is anymore, I say, open to deviance. So you have a loose adaptation. And of course you have hospitals with a lack of control. They are not strong into compliance. And you have a profession-based gaming with a high peer pressure. So it's not just organizational deviance, it's kind of profession-based deviance inside university hospitals that took place. So our answers so far, if the implementation of new rules by the organization is loose and unobservant, then the probability is higher that you will have this kind of profession-based or organizational deviance. If the environment offers windows for opportunity and you have this strong professional subcultures dominated by insiders, high-ranked insiders, socialized for a long time in the hospital, and you have this kind of hierarchical pressure. I'm done. Many thanks.